all excited. The sermon today is about a little girl. Are you going to tell us the story about the little girl?
Well, it's the grown-up story.
Why aren't you going to tell me the story about the little girl? I want to hear the story of the little girl.
Well, it's about a little girl, but it's for the grown-ups.
Can I listen? Please, can I listen?
Oh, sure. Children can listen to the grown-up sermon. Will you sit and be quiet?
Well, most of the time I'll be quiet. I'll sit in this chair and watch you preach.
Okay.
So what are you going to tell us about? It's picnic day. It's a picnic day. It's a holiday. We're going to talk about baked beans, hot dogs, watermelon, Coca-Cola, cook the dogs, do a marshmallow. Isn't it a holiday? Ha-ha. Isn't it a holiday?
Excuse me.
What is it, Moose?
I think I better tell the story of the holiday. That little puppy, he just is too silly.
Well, come on up here, Moose. I don't know if anybody's gotten to hear much from you. They got to...
Not easy sitting on your lap. A moose sitting on a lap is kind of silly. Do you know how big a moose is?
Well, it's bigger than a horse.
Yeah, a horse is big, but a moose is bigger. I just can't get comfortable. Okay, this will work.
What are you going to tell us about the holiday?
Well, it's Memorial Day. And Memorial Day is a special day. And yes, we might have hot dogs and Coca-Cola and lemonade, but it's a day to remember. And it's not just a silly day, puppy. Remember that. It's memorial.
So what are we remembering?
Well, Memorial Day is a day that we remember the soldiers who have fought and died. There are two holidays. One is Veterans Day, when we remember our veterans who even are still living. But Memorial Day is a special day when we remember those who died.
Oh, that's sad.
Well, it is sad, but we want to remember them well. And you know who it's most special day for?
No, who?
Well, if you had a son or a father or a husband who died and it was part of your family, that would feel very bad and you'd want everybody to remember.
Oh, I guess I sure would.
Or if you were a soldier and you were fighting with a buddy and that buddy died, fighting with you, maybe even saving your life, you would especially want to remember that soldier and friend.
Oh, wow, sure would.
And then everybody else in the country remembers the soldiers that fought.
Oh, wow.
But you know somebody else that died? We read Jesus told his disciples before he went on the cross that there's no greater love for anybody than he laid down his life for a friend.
Oh, wow.
And Jesus knew he was going to die on the cross. So we remember our soldiers who died for our country, but even more special is Jesus who died on the cross for his friends.
I want to be his friend.
Well, if you trust Jesus, he wants to be your friend too.
Oh, wow. Thanks. I'll try to remember Jesus and all the soldiers.
I think your brother will too. Okay. Well, maybe I'm going to talk more next week. We'll see. I like talking to the children. Goodbye, children.
Goodbye.
Okay, I'll turn you around so you can listen to the sermon. Well, good morning. I am John McElwain, a transitional pastor here at Graystone. It is Memorial Day weekend. It is important that on Veterans Day and Memorial Day we do remember our soldiers. I like us to do that, and usually the sermon is not about our soldiers, but I like to choose soldiers from the Scriptures on these special days. So at Veterans Day, you know, we did the centurion that amazed Jesus and the other one at the cross who was amazed by Jesus. And this week we're going into the Old Testament to do a general. And it occurs to me that the Bible seems to hold soldiers and officers, centurions, generals in high regard. And even many of the ones that we hear about are not from Israel. And so this soldier is a soldier actually from an enemy country, but an honorable man that God dealt with. So we're in 2 Kings this morning. As Sister Wrinkles let it out of the bag, as it were. There is a little girl in this story. She is the hero of it when we have children's stories. But as we read along, and we will let her listen, and children can listen, but as we read through this story, we will see that while it is a child and a child's faith that starts the story going and launches it, there are some grown-up themes that we will look at as we go. 2 Kings chapter 5, actually it's 26 verses, and I was taught in seminary never preach a sermon on more than 12 verses. So I'm breaking the rules. We'll see how that goes. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master, highly regarded because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master could see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him from his leprosy." Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel said. "By all means go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. Now, I do need to stop. That's 750 pounds of silver and 150 pounds of gold, plus these 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took from the king of Israel said, "With this letter, I'm sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of leprosy." As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robe and said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me?" When Elijah, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me. He will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, "Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be clean." But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of my leprosy. Are not the Abana and the Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than any of these waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So he turned and went off in a rage. Naaman's servant went to him and said, My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? So he went down and dipped. I have to stop here. This general is angry and he's in a rage, and his servant says, well, if he gave you a hard thing, wouldn't you do it? And like that, or did it take 5 minutes? Did it take 20 minutes? In a sense, did the writer who wrote this, was it a half hour or an hour? When someone's enraged, usually they don't flip so quickly. But at any rate, he gave him this wisdom, this servant did. So he went down, dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God told him, and his flesh was restored, and he became clean like a young boy. Then Naaman and his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, Now I know that there is no God in the world except in Israel. Please accept now gifts from your servant. The prophet answered, As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing. And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. If you will not, said Naaman, please let your servant be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I bow there also. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. Go in peace, Elisha said. After Naaman had traveled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, My master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. When Naaman saw him running toward him, he got down from his chariot and met him. Is everything all right? He asked. Everything is all right, Gehazi answered. My master sent me to say, 2 young men from the company of prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing. By all means, take 2 talents, said Naaman. He urged Gehazi to accept them and then tied them up into 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 sets of clothing. He gave them 2 servants, and they carried them ahead of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the hill, he took the things from the servants, put them away in the house. He sent the men away, and they left. Then he went and stood before the master Elisha. Where have you been, Gehazi? Elisha asked. Oh, your servant didn't go anywhere, Gehazi answered. But Elisha said, Was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Is this the time to take money or to accept clothes, olive groves, vineyards, flocks, herds, or men servants or maid servants? Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever. Then Gehazi went from Elijah's presence, and he was leprous, as white as snow. So we can see why this story is appealing to children. Here is a young girl taken captive, taken away from her home in a raid, serving now the general's wife. But evidently the general's wife was kind to her, sufficiently kind after being taken away from her family. And so here we have this general who's admired and respected and honorable, led victories. The king respected him, but he had leprosy. And the young girl couldn't help herself. She believed God. She believed that God could heal. She believed that God could make a difference. It was Jesus that said, unless we become like a child, we cannot enter the kingdom. And so this childlike faith that knew that if this general could just get to the prophet of God in Samaria, she was speaking of Elisha, that this Elisha, through the power of God, could heal him. And so there she is, bearing witness to her faith to this family in a foreign land, in a difficult situation. And so the general goes to the king, and the king gives him gold and silver and clothes and writes him a letter, no doubt thinking that if there's this magician in Israel, that the king of Israel would be able to tell the magician to do his magic. And so he sent it to the king, thinking that it must be a magic worker, and the magic worker certainly would take his orders from the king. Well, in fact, when the king received it, the message that he was to heal, he thought the king of Aram was setting a trap to start a war. And he tore his clothes. He tore his clothes, which was a sign of great distress. And then Elisha heard it. So Elijah was not a magician, a magic worker. Elisha did not take his orders from the king of Israel. No, Elisha was a prophet of God. He took his orders from God, and if anybody took orders from anyone, it was Elisha speaking for God who would tell the king what to do. And so Elisha sent to the king and said, "Why did you tear your clothes? Why are you so afraid? Send him here, and he will know that the God of Israel is the God of everyone." And so the king sent him off, and the general, strong and proud. There's something about generals and commanders that have the audacity to take command and to risk their lives and know how to protect and even risk the lives of their own soldiers to accomplish a goal. There also tends to be in them a little bit of an edge, and shall we say, at times, a bit of pride. Anybody else know what I'm talking about? So he shows up at Elisha's house and expects a general's welcome. He's got all this gold, all this silver, these clothes. He's used to people respecting him, giving him honor, parades, flags, whatever it took. And Elisha merely told his servant to go out and meet him. Elisha didn't even come and said, "Oh, go down to the Jordan River and dip yourself 7 times and everything will be fine." The general was furious. His pride was touched. Pride will kill us. Pride almost was the end of this Naaman. Except the humble servant came up to Naaman and said, "Look, if he asked you to do a hard thing, you would go prove that you could do it. Why not do this simple thing?" But the general his home rivers were more beautiful. They were cleaner. The Jordan River, while it's important to Christians and to Jewish people, it's really not that much to look at. It's generally a little bit muddy, not that clear. It's just special because God made it special, not because anybody looking at it would think it were much different than any creek running through Pennsylvania. But he decided to go and dipped himself and washed 7 times, and his skin was healed. It was given life. It was given back to him. And so he went back now to the prophet. It's interesting, he never even had a chance to offer this gold and silver as a sense to buy God's healing. Naaman's not the only one who thinks we can buy or leverage some good deed or something that we do to get God's favor. But now that he had been healed, he wanted to go back. And he wanted to talk to Elisha. And now he wanted to give him the gifts, in a sense, to pay for what is done. First, he wanted to pay for it in advance. Second, he wanted to pay for it afterwards. And all the way through this, you get a sense that Elisha is more concerned for Naaman as a person, his whole being, not just his healing, but who he is as a person, the state of his soul. Thus, he asked him to do something that called for great humility. You know, God could come and make big splashes to us, but he just gives us what some think is an old book. And he speaks his word through it, and he tells us what to do and calls us to act and obey. And then when he wanted to pay, in a sense, to have earned what God had done for him, Elisha still wanted this general to know that it's a gift of God. There's nothing he could do to earn it. Now, it is proper that he come back. We think of the story of Jesus healing the 10 lepers. He heals 10. Actually, they come to be healed. And he says, go to the priests. And they leave, not even yet healed, much like this story. And on the way to see the priests, they were healed. But one came back, only one out of the 10. And that one was a non-Jewish person, a Gentile or a half-Jew, a Samaritan. And Jesus said, where are the others? Samaritan didn't have an answer for that, but Jesus commended him and said, your faith has made you well. And so we get this sense that not only in their going, but in his coming back in gratitude, there was an acknowledgement that God had done something for him, and there was healing in it. We think of Jesus and the man who for 40 years was over 40 years by the pool and was lame. And Jesus asked him, do you want to be well? And so as we think this morning of Naaman, who had leprosy, an obvious thing that needed healed, the 10 lepers who came to Jesus, the one who had gone 40-some years, if Jesus said to you, what is it that needs healed? What is it that you might bring to him? It might even take a young child in your house to tell you, Mommy, Daddy, why don't you trust Jesus? Mommy, Daddy, why don't you see if God can do something about this? The sad part of the story goes on. Well, the best part, before we get to the sad part, is that Gehazi, once he realizes he can't buy it in the beginning and then cannot pay for it afterwards, he says, well, then let me take some dirt back with me, the dirt that 2 donkeys could carry, because there was a belief in that day that a god lived in a country. So each country had its own god. And so he wanted to take the dirt of Israel back with him so that he could set up an altar, a place, and worship the God who is the only God, and recognize that God is the one who had done it. Not a magician, not magic, not something that he paid for in advance or paid for afterwards, but God simply did it in his life. And so there was that transfer of allegiance. He did have a problem, though, when the king would go and bow down and he would help the king before the idol. He said, I need to go with the king. Can God not hold that against me? And Elijah just said, go in peace. He set him free. But here's someone who recognized that it is God who has made the difference, and then went on. But the sad part was the servant who was so greedy. And you know, a lot of people pick their churches by what the church can go do for them. We live in an age where pretty much people are choosing church for what it will do for me, what I can consume, what it will give me. And here is this prophet, servant Gehazi, after Elijah had done all he could to prepare this great general to bring humility and to know the great and powerful God, and that you can't buy it. Gehazi goes and says, give me some of those clothes. Give me a talent of silver. And the general, of course, gave it to him. And Gehazi, sneaking back, the servants had to help him carry it. 2 bags of 75 pounds each of silver. That's a good bit that Gehazi took in on that time. And he sneaks back, and Elisha says, where were you? And he said, I wasn't anywhere. I wasn't anywhere. And so this lie and a double lie and another lie. And the transition of the leprosy from Naaman, Elisha said, will now be on you and your family. And so there's a sadness. As I often say to you, the Bible stories that we tell to children are for children to understand, but they're for adults. There is a seriousness, a problem of pride, a problem of greed. And on this Memorial Day, when we thank those who have given the ultimate, and when we remember Christ who laid down his life for his friends, the question is, what do we do with our pride? What do we do with the things in our life? Christ has died for them. Will you trust him? We don't go and dip in the Jordan River, but we come in faith, trusting Christ for forgiveness, for new life, for whole life. We come remembering him. We come with all of our needs. And so I trust this Memorial Day, you will look to Christ, that you'll receive what he has done on your behalf. Let us pray. God and our Father, out of the lips of children, you bring forth your praise. And so for little ones in our lives that have looked to you and have trusted you, that you even use to remind us of who you are, we thank you. We thank you for those who have served. But above all, we thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, who gave the greatest love that anyone could give when he laid down his life. Help us to trust you and to know the benefit from that death. For we prayed in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, thanks, Pastor John. Don't forget to let us know that you've joined us today and how we can be praying for you. We want to continue to be connected in some way. You can go to graystonepc.org/connect to continue to let us know how we can be praying for you and just what's going on in this season. There's going to be one more song, and then the music is going to continue. So I invite you can just kind of leave it on as a virtual postlude, just some music to kind of fill the space with beauty and a focus on Jesus on this day where we remember the work that he has done. But as we go, I want to leave you with these good words. Now may the Lord of peace himself give you peace at all times and in every way. The Lord be with you all. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you next week.